The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Lieutenant Sarah Chen sat in the small gray room, her hands cuffed to a metal table. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents had been questioning her for 3 hours now, and their disbelief hung in the air like thick smoke. "So you're telling us," Agent Martinez said, leaning back in his chair with a smirk, "that you're a Navy SEAL? You expect us to believe that?" Sarah kept her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that showing emotion in situations like this only made things worse. "I've told you the truth. Check my records." Agent Patterson, a stocky man with graying temples, slammed a folder on the table. "We did check. There's no record of any Sarah Chen in SEAL Team 6, no record of you completing Bud-S training, nothing." The accusation stung. But Sarah had expected this. It wasn't the first time her credentials had been questioned, and it probably wouldn't be the last. Being a woman in the SEALs meant constantly proving herself, even when she shouldn't have to. "The records are classified," she said calmly. "Above your clearance level." Martinez laughed, a harsh sound in the small room. "Right. Convenient excuse. Look, lady, we know you've been hanging around the base, telling people you're special forces. That's impersonating a federal officer. That's a felony." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. The whole situation had started innocently enough. She had been grabbing coffee at a cafe near Naval Base Coronado when she overheard 2 young sailors arguing about SEAL training. One of them was spreading dangerous misinformation about water survival techniques that could get someone killed. She had quietly corrected them, sharing proper safety protocols. When they asked how she knew so much, she had simply said she was a SEAL. The sailors had laughed and called her crazy. Word had spread quickly through the base's rumor mill, and before she knew it, security was escorting her off the premises. Now she was here, being treated like a fraud and a criminal. "I wasn't impersonating anyone," Sarah said. "I am who I say I am." Patterson opened the folder and pulled out several photos. They showed Sarah at various locations around the base over the past week. "These photos were taken by base security. You've been seen multiple times trying to gain access to restricted areas. You've been asking questions about classified operations." "I was visiting friends," Sarah replied, "and I wasn't asking about classified operations. I was catching up with my teammates." "Your teammates?" Martinez leaned forward. "You mean the imaginary SEALs you serve with?" Sarah remained silent. She couldn't reveal operational details, even to clear her own name. The missions she had been part of were beyond top secret. The very nature of her team's existence was compartmentalized information that these agents would never have access to. Agent Patterson pulled out another document. "We've done a thorough background check on you, Ms. Chen. Born in San Francisco, graduated from UC Berkeley with a degree in mechanical engineering. You worked for a tech company for 2 years before enlisting in the Navy. Standard enlisted service. Nothing special. No SEAL training. No special operations background." The background they described was real, but it was only part of the story. Sarah's recruitment into the SEALs hadn't followed traditional paths. She had been identified during her standard Navy service for her exceptional physical capabilities and psychological profile. Her engineering background and language skills had made her particularly valuable for certain types of missions. "That's all public record," Sarah said. "Of course that's what you'd find." "So now you're claiming there's some secret conspiracy to hide your SEAL career?" Martinez shook his head. "Do you realize how insane that sounds?" Sarah had heard it all before. The disbelief, the mockery, the assumptions that she was either delusional or lying. It came with the territory of being one of only a handful of women ever to complete SEAL training successfully. The door to the interrogation room opened, and a base security officer stepped in. He whispered something to Agent Patterson, who frowned and nodded. "Seems you have some friends in high places," Patterson said. "Someone's been making calls on your behalf." Sarah felt a flicker of relief. Her team commander must have been notified of her detention. It would take time to sort out the clearance issues, but at least someone in the chain of command knew where she was. However, Martinez continued, we still need to verify your claims. Until then, you're staying right here. The next several hours passed slowly. Sarah was moved to a holding cell where she waited in silence. She had been in worse situations during her military career, captured behind enemy lines, trapped in underwater caves, surviving in hostile territory for days without supplies. A clean cell with a cot was luxury compared to some of the places she had been. But the psychological aspect was harder to handle. Having her identity and achievements questioned struck at something deeper. Sarah had sacrificed everything to become a SEAL. She had endured physical torture during training that broke most men. She had proven herself in combat situations that would haunt her dreams forever. Being treated like a faker was almost worse than facing enemy fire. As evening approached, Sarah heard increased activity in the corridor outside her cell. Voices were speaking in urgent, hushed tones. She caught fragments of conversation about clearance verification and need-to-know basis. A guard appeared at her cell door around 8 o'clock. "You have a visitor," he said, unlocking the door. Sarah was escorted back to the interrogation room, but this time the atmosphere was different. Agents Martinez and Patterson were still there, but they looked uncomfortable. Standing near the back wall was a woman in navy dress whites, whom Sarah didn't recognize. "Lieutenant Chen," the woman said, stepping forward. "I'm Commander Walsh from Naval Special Warfare Command. I apologize for the inconvenience you've experienced today." Sarah remained standing at attention. "Ma'am." Commander Walsh turned to the NCIS agents. "Gentlemen, I need to speak with Lieutenant Chen privately. This matter involves classified operations that are outside your jurisdiction." Agent Martinez started to object. "Commander, we have an ongoing investigation here. This woman has been impersonating—" "This woman," Commander Walsh cut him off sharply, "is exactly who she claims to be. Her records are classified at the highest levels for operational security reasons. Your investigation is over." Patterson stood up. "We can't just take your word for it. We need verification through proper channels." Commander Walsh pulled out her phone and dialed a number. She waited a moment, then spoke. "Admiral Morrison?" "Yes, sir. I have the NCIS agents here who detained Lieutenant Chen." She listened for a moment, then held the phone out to Agent Patterson. "The Admiral would like to speak with you." Patterson took the phone reluctantly. Sarah watched his face change as he listened to whatever Admiral Morrison was telling him. His expression went from skeptical to concerned to genuinely worried. "Yes, sir," he said finally. "Understood, sir." He handed the phone back to Commander Walsh with shaking hands. "Is there a problem?" Commander Walsh asked sweetly. "No, ma'am," Patterson stammered. "No problem at all. We'll be releasing Lieutenant Chen immediately." Agent Martinez looked confused. "What's going on?" Patterson was already gathering up the files. "We made a mistake, a big mistake. Lieutenant Chen's identity is confirmed at the highest levels." As the agents hurried to remove her handcuffs, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. It wasn't the first time her true status had surprised people, and it wouldn't be the last. But Commander Walsh wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," she said to the agents. "This entire incident is now classified. Any reports you've filed need to be transferred to Naval Special Warfare Command immediately. You will not discuss this case with anyone. Is that understood?" Both agents nodded quickly. Commander Walsh turned to Sarah. "Lieutenant, the Admiral wants to see you first thing tomorrow morning. There's been a development in Operation Neptune's Trident that requires your immediate attention." Sarah nodded. "Yes, ma'am." As they left the interrogation room, Commander Walsh spoke quietly. "Sorry about the runaround, Chen. Your cover identity is so deep that even friendly agencies can't verify it quickly. We're working on improving the process." "Understood, ma'am," Sarah replied. "Part of the job." Outside the NCIS building, Commander Walsh handed Sarah her personal effects. "Your teammates have been worried about you. Rodriguez in particular wanted to come down here and straighten this out himself, but we convinced him to let us handle it through official channels." Sarah smiled, thinking of her explosive ordnance disposal specialist teammate. Miguel Rodriguez would have indeed straightened things out, probably by intimidating the agents into submission with his special forces credentials and impressive physical presence. "How did you find out I was detained?" Sarah asked. "Your phone has a GPS tracker that alerts us if you're held in custody for more than 6 hours," Commander Walsh explained. "Standard protocol for deep cover operatives. We can't have our people disappearing into the regular justice system." They reached Sarah's car in the visitor parking lot. "Get some rest tonight," Commander Walsh said. "Tomorrow's briefing is going to be intense. We've located the submarine we've been tracking and it's heading for U.S. waters. The Admiral wants your team to intercept it." Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with a new mission. This was what she lived for, the chance to use her training and skills to protect her country. The day's humiliation was already fading into background noise. "Any preliminary intelligence on the target?" she asked. Commander Walsh glanced around to make sure they weren't overheard. "Foreign submarine, unknown nationality, but definitely not friendly. It's been shadowing our carrier groups for weeks. Intelligence suggests they're planning something significant." Sarah nodded. Submarine interdiction was one of her team's specialties. Her engineering background made her particularly valuable for understanding underwater vessel systems and vulnerabilities. "I'll be ready, ma'am," she said. As Commander Walsh drove away, Sarah sat in her car for a moment, processing the day's events. Being detained and questioned had been unpleasant, but it was part of the reality of living a double life. To the outside world, she was just another Navy technician. Only a select few knew about her true role in the military's most classified operations. She started her car and headed home to her small apartment off base. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and dangers, but tonight she would rest and prepare. Being a SEAL meant being ready for anything, whether it was enemy submarines or suspicious federal agents. The parking lot was nearly empty as she drove out. In the distance, she could see the lights of Naval Base Coronado, where her real career had begun years ago in the brutal crucible of SEAL training. Every day since then had been a test of her abilities and determination. Tomorrow's mission would be another test, but Sarah Chen was ready for it. She always was. The next morning arrived gray and cold, with Pacific fog rolling in from the ocean like a thick blanket. Sarah Chen stood at attention in Admiral Morrison's office, her dress uniform crisp and her bearing impeccable. The events of the previous day seemed like a distant memory compared to the gravity of what lay ahead. Admiral Morrison was a tall, weathered man who had spent 30 years in naval special operations. His office walls were covered with commendations, unit citations, and photos from deployments around the world. Sarah had worked under his command for 3 years, and she respected him more than any officer she had ever served with. "Have a seat, Lieutenant," the Admiral said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "We need to discuss yesterday's incident, and then we'll move on to your new assignment." Sarah sat down, maintaining her professional posture. "Sir, I apologize for the security breach. I should have been more careful about operational security." Admiral Morrison waved dismissively. "You did nothing wrong, Chen. The fault lies with our clearance verification systems. When we create deep cover identities for operatives like yourself, we sometimes create them too well. Even our own people can't verify them quickly." He pulled out a thick file and placed it on his desk. "Let's review your real background, shall we? The one those NCIS agents couldn't access." Sarah nodded, knowing that everything in that file represented years of her life that officially didn't exist. Born Sarah Elizabeth Chen in San Francisco to immigrant parents. Father was a mechanical engineer who worked on naval shipyard projects. Mother was a translator for the State Department, Admiral Morrison read. You grew up speaking Mandarin, Cantonese, and English fluently. Graduated valedictorian from high school, full scholarship to UC Berkeley for mechanical engineering. The Admiral flipped through several pages. Excellent academic record, but you also competed in triathlons and rock climbing. Physical fitness scores that were literally off the charts. When you enlisted in the Navy after graduation, your recruiter flagged you for special assessment. Sarah remembered those early days clearly. She had joined the Navy to pay off student loans and gain experience before starting her engineering career. She had never imagined it would become her life's calling. Your initial assignment was to the USS Hampton as a mechanical systems specialist, Admiral Morrison continued. But within 6 months, you came to the attention of Naval Special Warfare Command. Your combination of technical expertise, physical capabilities, and psychological profile was exactly what we were looking for. What the Admiral didn't mention was how unusual her recruitment had been. Women weren't officially allowed in SEAL training at the time. Sarah's entry into the program had been part of a classified pilot program to evaluate female operators for special missions. Bud's training was... Admiral Morrison paused, looking for the right words. Challenging for you in ways that went beyond the standard physical and mental demands. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. That was an understatement. Basic underwater demolition SEAL training was designed to break down candidates mentally and physically. For Sarah, there had been the added challenge of proving herself to instructors and fellow candidates who believed women didn't belong in special operations. The first week of training had been particularly brutal. During one exercise, she had been deliberately paired with the largest, most aggressive candidate in her class for combat training. The instructors wanted to see if she would quit when faced with a significant physical disadvantage. Instead, Sarah had used her mechanical engineering background to analyze leverage and force multiplication. She had studied her opponent's movements and found weaknesses in his technique. When the fight started, she had used his size and aggression against him, redirecting his force and exploiting his balance points. The match had ended with her opponent unconscious, and the instructors grudgingly impressed. Week 12 was when you really distinguished yourself, Admiral Morrison said, reading from the file. The underwater demolition exercise where your team was trapped beneath the training platform. Sarah remembered that day vividly. Her 6-person team had been conducting an underwater demolition training exercise when the platform above them had shifted, trapping them beneath tons of metal and concrete. The safety divers couldn't reach them, and the team was running out of air. While her teammates had panicked, Sarah had remained calm and analyzed the situation. Using her engineering knowledge, she had identified the structural weak points in the debris field. She had guided her team through a complex sequence of movements that gradually shifted the wreckage, creating an escape route. All 6 team members had survived, and Sarah's quick thinking had prevented what could have been a training disaster. The incident had earned her the respect of her fellow candidates and instructors alike. That's when we knew you were special operations material, Admiral Morrison said. But your real test came during advanced training. The advanced training had been unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Beyond the physical challenges of SEAL training, she had been selected for additional specialized instruction in languages, cultural studies, and technical infiltration. The Navy had recognized that her unique background made her valuable for missions that required both technical expertise and cultural sensitivity. Your first deployment was to Southeast Asia, the Admiral continued. Officially, you were there as a technical advisor. Unofficially, you were gathering intelligence on Chinese submarine technology. That mission had been Sarah's introduction to the shadowy world of naval intelligence operations. She had spent 3 months in Singapore and Hong Kong, using her engineering credentials and language skills to gain access to shipyards and defense contractors. The intelligence she had gathered had led to significant improvements in U.S. submarine detection capabilities. Since then, you've been involved in 17 classified operations across 4 continents, Admiral Murmured said, closing the file. Your record is exemplary, which is why yesterday's incident was so frustrating. Sarah shifted in her chair. Sir, I understand the need for operational security, but the cover identity creates problems when dealing with other agencies. I agree, Admiral Murmured replied. We're working on improving the verification process. But for now, your deep cover remains essential for the types of missions you undertake. The Admiral stood up and walked to a secure safe in the corner of his office. He entered a complex code and withdrew a folder marked with the highest classification symbols. Which brings us to your current assignment, he said, returning to his desk. Operation Neptune's Trident has taken a critical turn. The submarine we've been tracking is no longer just gathering intelligence. Our sources indicate it's preparing to conduct an attack on U.S. naval assets. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was the kind of threat that her team was specifically trained to handle. The submarine is a Yuan-class attack submarine, modified for special operations, Admiral Murmured explained, opening the classified folder. Chinese manufacture, but crew nationality is unknown. It's been operating in international waters off the California coast for the past 2 weeks. He handed Sarah a set of satellite photographs showing a sleek, modern submarine partially surfaced. Intelligence suggests it's carrying a team of combat divers and specialized equipment for underwater sabotage. Sarah studied the photos carefully. The submarine's modifications were clearly visible. Additional hull attachments that looked like diver deployment systems and what appeared to be advanced sonar equipment. Target assessment? She asked. Most likely target is the naval shipyard at San Diego, Admiral Murmured replied. We have 2 aircraft carriers in port for maintenance, plus several nuclear submarines. If this hostile submarine can deploy sabotage teams inside the harbor, the damage could be catastrophic. Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. A successful attack on ships in port could cripple the Pacific Fleet for months. The strategic and political consequences would be enormous. What's the mission profile? She asked. Admiral Murmured pulled out a maritime chart marked with various symbols and coordinates. Your team will deploy from the USS Columbia, a Virginia-class attack submarine. You'll approach the hostile submarine undetected and conduct a boarding operation. Sarah examined the chart, calculating approach routes and timing. ROE? Rules of engagement are defensive initially, Admiral Murmured explained. We want to capture the submarine and its crew if possible. However, if they pose an imminent threat to U.S. assets, you're authorized to use whatever force is necessary to neutralize them. This was the kind of mission that required all of Sarah's specialized skills. Underwater infiltration, technical sabotage, and close-quarters combat in the confined space of a submarine. It was also extremely dangerous. Submarine boarding operations had some of the highest casualty rates in special operations. Team composition? Sarah asked. Your usual team, Admiral Murmured replied. Rodriguez for explosive ordnance, Kowalski for communications and electronics, Williams for medical support, and Jackson for heavy weapons, plus 2 additional divers from SEAL Team 5 for support. Sarah knew her team well. They had worked together on multiple missions and had developed the kind of seamless coordination that was essential for special operations. Miguel Rodriguez was not just an explosives expert, but also one of the best underwater demolition specialists in the Navy. Tom Kowalski could hack into virtually any electronic system and could maintain communications in the most challenging environments. Petty Officer Williams was a combat medic who could perform surgery in a combat zone if necessary, and Marcus Jackson was simply the most lethal operator Sarah had ever worked with. Timeline? She asked. Admiral Murmured checked his watch. The Columbia is already en route to the intercept coordinates. You and your team will transfer to the submarine at 1400 hours today. The mission launches at 2300 hours. Sarah calculated the timing. Less than 12 hours to prepare for one of the most dangerous types of operations in naval special warfare. It was cutting it close, but her team was used to rapid deployment scenarios. "Intelligence package?" she asked. Admiral Morrison handed her a sealed envelope. "Everything we know about the submarine's capabilities, crew estimates, and potential mission objectives. Study it during the transit to Columbia." Sarah stood up and tucked the envelope into her uniform jacket. "Anything else, sir?" Admiral Morrison looked at her seriously. "Chen, this mission has the highest priority from the Joint Chiefs. If this submarine successfully attacks our ships in port, it could be the beginning of a much larger conflict. The political implications are staggering." Sarah understood. This wasn't just about stopping a submarine attack. It was about preventing a potential war. "We'll stop them, sir," she said with quiet confidence. As Sarah headed for the door, Admiral Morrison called after her. "Lieutenant, about yesterday's incident, I want you to know that I've spoken with the NCIS leadership about improving their verification procedures. No operative under my command should have to endure what you went through." Sarah paused at the door. "Thank you, sir, but it comes with the territory. The cover identity is essential for operational security." Admiral Morrison nodded approvingly. "That's the kind of attitude that makes you an exceptional operative, Chen. Good hunting." Sarah left the Admiral's office with her mind already shifting into mission mode. She had 6 hours to brief her team, check equipment, and mentally prepare for what could be the most dangerous mission of her career. As she walked through the corridors of Naval Special Warfare Command, other personnel stepped aside respectfully. Word had spread through the special operations community about yesterday's incident, and Sarah's reputation had only grown stronger. She was known as an operator who could handle any situation, whether it was enemy action or bureaucratic incompetence. The fog was beginning to lift as Sarah stepped outside, revealing glimpses of blue sky. It felt like a good omen. In less than 12 hours, she would be underwater, approaching an enemy submarine with lethal intent. But right now, she had work to do. Her team was waiting. 6 months later, Sarah Chen found herself in an eerily similar situation, but this time the stakes were even higher. She was sitting in a congressional hearing room, facing a panel of skeptical politicians who were questioning the legitimacy of women in special operations roles. The mission to stop the Chinese submarine had been a complete success. Sarah's team had boarded the hostile vessel, captured its crew, and prevented what intelligence analysts later confirmed would have been a devastating attack on the San Diego naval base. But the mission's classified nature meant that Sarah couldn't discuss any details publicly. Now she was facing a different kind of interrogation. Senator Harrison, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, was leading a public hearing on women in combat roles. His questions carried the same tone of disbelief that Sarah had encountered from the NCIS agents. "Lieutenant Chen," Senator Harrison said, adjusting his glasses as he looked down at her from the elevated panel, "you claim to have completed Navy SEAL training and served in special operations for over 4 years. However, our records show that women were not officially allowed in SEAL training until very recently." Sarah sat in her dress blue uniform at a small table facing the panel of senators. Behind her, the gallery was filled with reporters, military officials, and women's rights advocates. Every word of this hearing was being broadcast live across the nation. "Senator, my training and service are fully documented in classified records," Sarah replied calmly. "I was part of a pilot program that evaluated female operators for specialized missions." Senator Patterson, a retired Army colonel who had been skeptical of women in combat roles throughout his political career, leaned into his microphone. "A pilot program that apparently left no public record? How convenient." Sarah had been through this type of questioning before, but never in such a public forum. The hearing had been called after a news article questioned whether the Navy was exaggerating women's roles in special operations for political purposes. Senator, operational security requires that certain programs remain classified, Sarah explained. The nature of my assignments has required deep cover identities that are not subject to normal verification procedures. Senator Harrison shuffled through his papers. Lieutenant, we've had testimony from several former SEAL instructors who state that no woman has ever successfully completed the full BUD-S training program. Are you claiming they're mistaken? Sarah chose her words carefully. Senator, I'm claiming that there are aspects of special operations training and deployment that are not subject to public disclosure. The hearing had been going on for 2 hours, and Sarah could see the frustration building among the senators. They wanted clear, simple answers that she couldn't provide without violating security protocols. Senator Williams, one of the few women on the committee, tried a different approach. Lieutenant Chen, setting aside the classified aspects of your service, can you describe your motivation for joining special operations? Sarah appreciated the more respectful tone. Ma'am, I joined the Navy to serve my country and use my skills where they could make the most difference. When I was identified as having the capabilities for special operations, I viewed it as an opportunity to contribute at the highest level. And what specific capabilities made you suitable for special operations? Senator Williams continued. My engineering background, physical fitness, language skills, and psychological evaluation all indicated compatibility with special operations requirements, Sarah replied. Senator Harrison interrupted. But you understand our skepticism, Lieutenant. We're being asked to believe that the Navy has had women serving in the SEALs for years, but kept it completely secret. That strains credibility. Before Sarah could respond, the hearing room doors opened and Admiral Morrison entered, followed by 2 other high-ranking officers. The room fell silent as the Admiral walked down the aisle in his dress-white uniform, his chest covered with ribbons representing decades of distinguished service. Senator Harrison, Admiral Morrison said as he approached the witness table, I apologize for the interruption, but I believe I can provide some clarification for the committee. Senator Harrison looked surprised. Admiral Morrison, you're not scheduled to testify today. No, sir, but I believe my testimony is essential for understanding Lieutenant Chen's service record, Admiral Morrison replied. He took a seat next to Sarah at the witness table. The hearing room buzzed with whispered conversations as reporters recognized the significance of Admiral Morrison's presence. He was a legendary figure in naval special operations, and his sudden appearance suggested that there was more to Sarah's story than had been revealed. Admiral, Senator Harrison said, are you prepared to testify under oath about Lieutenant Chen's service? I am, Senator, Admiral Morrison replied firmly. After the Admiral was sworn in, Senator Harrison continued his questioning. Admiral, in your opinion, has Lieutenant Chen served with distinction in naval special operations? Senator, Lieutenant Chen is one of the most capable operators I have commanded in 30 years of special operations leadership, Admiral Morrison replied. Her service record is exemplary by any measure. Senator Patterson leaned forward. Admiral, we've heard claims about classified programs and deep cover identities, but we need verification. Can you provide concrete evidence of Lieutenant Chen's training and service? Admiral Morrison reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder. Senator, I have here Lieutenant Chen's actual service record, including her BUD-S training completion certificate, mission reports, and commendations. These documents have been declassified specifically for this hearing. The room erupted in murmurs as Admiral Morrison handed the documents to the committee clerk. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and concern. Declassifying her records would end the questions about her legitimacy, but it would also expose years of covert operations. Senator Harrison examined the documents for several minutes before looking up. Admiral, These records indicate that Lieutenant Chen has been involved in 17 classified operations across 4 continents. Can you confirm these details? I can, Senator. Each of those operations was conducted under my command or oversight. Lieutenant Chen's performance has been consistently outstanding. Senator Williams studied one of the documents. Admiral, this commendation mentions Lieutenant Chen preventing a potential attack on U.S. naval assets. Can you elaborate? Admiral Morrison glanced at Sarah before responding. Senator, 6 months ago, Lieutenant Chen led a team that intercepted and boarded a hostile submarine that was preparing to attack ships in San Diego Harbor. Her actions prevented what could have been catastrophic damage to the Pacific Fleet. The hearing room fell completely silent. The dramatic nature of the revelation had stunned even the experienced politicians on the committee. Senator Harrison set down the documents. Admiral, why has this information been kept classified until now? Senator, operational security is paramount in special operations, Admiral Morrison explained. Many of Lieutenant Chen's missions involved deep cover operations where revealing details could compromise ongoing intelligence gathering or endanger other operatives. Senator Patterson, who had been among Sarah's harshest critics, studied the mission reports. Admiral, these documents indicate that Lieutenant Chen has received the Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and the Defense Distinguished Service Medal. These are among our military's highest honors. That's correct, Senator, Admiral Morrison confirmed. The ceremonies were conducted in classified settings due to the nature of her service. Sarah watched as the tone of the hearing shifted dramatically. The senators who had been questioning her legitimacy were now reviewing documentation of her extraordinary service record. Senator Williams looked up from the documents. Lieutenant Chen, I owe you an apology. It's clear that you have served with exceptional distinction, and questioning your credibility was inappropriate. Ma'am, no apology is necessary, Sarah replied. Oversight and accountability are important aspects of democratic governance. Admiral Morrison stood up. Senators, I want to address the broader question that prompted this hearing. Lieutenant Chen is not an anomaly. She represents the future of special operations. The threats we face require operators with diverse skills and backgrounds. Gender is irrelevant when lives are on the line. He turned to face the gallery filled with reporters and observers. For too long, we've limited ourselves by artificial barriers. Lieutenant Chen and others like her have proven that capability is what matters, not preconceptions about who can serve. Senator Harrison called for a brief recess to allow the committee to review the newly declassified documents. During the break, Sarah found herself surrounded by reporters asking questions about her service. Lieutenant Chen, how does it feel to have your service finally recognized publicly? One reporter asked. Sarah thought carefully before responding. I'm proud to serve my country, and I'm honored to represent all the women who have served in special operations roles, often without recognition. Another reporter called out, What would you say to young women considering military careers? I would say that your country needs your talents, Sarah replied. Don't let anyone tell you what you're not capable of achieving. When the hearing resumed, Senator Harrison addressed Sarah directly. Lieutenant Chen, on behalf of this committee, I want to thank you for your service and apologize for any doubt cast on your credentials. The evidence is overwhelming that you have served with extraordinary distinction. Admiral Morrison requested permission to make a final statement. Senators, Lieutenant Chen's story illustrates a larger point. We have many exceptional operators whose service remains classified. The nature of modern warfare requires special operations personnel to work in the shadows, often without recognition or acknowledgement. He gestured toward Sarah. Today, we can finally recognize one of these operators publicly. But there are many others who continue to serve without fanfare, protecting our nation from threats that the public never learns about. The Admiral's words resonated throughout the hearing room. Sarah realized that her public recognition was creating opportunities for other women in special operations who had been serving in similar obscurity. Senator Williams addressed the broader implications. This hearing has revealed that our assumptions about women in special operations were incomplete. What other capabilities might we be overlooking due to outdated thinking? After the hearing concluded, Sarah was approached by dozens of young women who had been watching the proceedings. Many were military personnel, others were civilians considering military careers. "Ma'am," one young Navy ensign said, "I've been told I should consider logistics or intelligence rather than special operations. After hearing your testimony, I'm going to apply for SEAL training." Sarah smiled. "That's exactly what you should do. Don't let anyone limit your potential." Outside the Capitol building, Admiral Morrison walked with Sarah toward their waiting car. "How do you feel about going public?" he asked. Sarah considered the question. "It's strange after years of operating in the shadows, but if it opens doors for other women, it's worth it." The Admiral nodded. "Your story is going to change how people think about special operations. That's almost as important as the missions you've completed." As they drove back toward the Pentagon, Sarah reflected on the dramatic change in her circumstances. 6 months ago, she had been detained by federal agents who refused to believe she was a SEAL. Today, she had testified before Congress about her decorated special operations career. The transition from shadow warrior to public figure would require adjustment, but Sarah was ready for the challenge. She had spent her career breaking barriers and exceeding expectations. This was simply the next phase of her service. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Rodriguez. "Saw the hearing on TV. Proud to serve with you. Ready for the next mission?" Sarah smiled as she typed back, "Always ready. The mission continues." The car pulled into the Pentagon parking lot as the sun was setting over the Potomac River. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. Sarah Chen had proven that barriers could be broken and expectations exceeded. But most importantly, she had shown that service to country transcends all artificial limitations. The tattoo on her shoulder, barely visible beneath her uniform, bore the sealed trident, authentic proof of her authentic service. She was ready for whatever came next.